Several years ago, my family took a summer vacation to Colorado. We haven't taken a summer vacation into Colorado since about 2018. And on this particular vacation, we, like you do when you're in the mountains, you enjoy the beauty of the mountains. And so I remember this one particular afternoon, we decided to go on a family hike. And when you have children, 11, 8, and whatever the little ones were, I don't even think Scout was walking at this point 7 years ago. You find trails that are going to be easy enough for everyone, and that's exactly what we did. So we found a trail for all of us to enjoy together while we're carrying, 1.5 children along the way and all of this. And I remember the afternoon very well because it was an enjoyable afternoon. And we found trails. And I remember the older girls, Reese and Lucy, I believe they were 11 and 8 at the time. I remember we'd find these easy trails, but they were leading us, and they kept taking us off the trails. It's like, this would be better. And we'd find ourselves in places, and you're like, what are you doing? Let's get back to the trail. And I remember this whole afternoon. In fact, go ahead, David, I got a picture here. I thought, yes, here we go. I like this picture because I remember the afternoon. And I remember that's Reese. And that's her mother in front of her, I think, carrying Scout there, and they were kind of leading the way. And we were going through this family hike together, and one of my favorite quotes from my children ever, Reese, at some point during this hike, I think I took this picture right after she said this, and that's little Reese. She said, "This mountain thing is easy." "This mountain thing is easy," she said. She was having a ball. They were enjoying it and everything they were doing. This mountain thing is easy. Now, I don't know what your mountain experiences are. I don't know if you've even had mountain experiences. Many of us in this room have. And no matter if you were doing family hikes or if you were trying to summit a mountain, you know that when you were on a mountain, this mountain thing is not always an easy thing, right? That being on the mountain in of itself is opening yourself up to difficulty, because being on the mountain opens up difficult moments or opportunities. And so while the girls were having a ball and then this mountain thing was easy, I want to remind you they had two parents who were carrying at least one child all the time and another one about at least half the time, and were following them off the trails when they were trying to explore in different areas. That the mountain thing she thought was easy was actually quite difficult for at least a couple of other members of her family, right? In the exact same hike, in the very same hike that afternoon, all the way back in 2018, let me show you this next picture because these live together. There's little Lucy, and I don't think Dad taking a picture of her crying was very helpful in that moment for her. But while one sister has said this mountain thing is easy, in the same hike, in the same experience, there's a little sister who's crying for whatever reason. If you knew Lucy back then, she was crying a lot. Anyways, they live together. This mountain thing is easy, and the crying difficulty of being on a mountain. I'm inviting us, church, to get on a mountain. I'm inviting us to be in a place that will have moments of easiness where we'll say, this is great, this is beneficial, I love this. But I am also promising you that there will be moments of difficulty. Because being on a mountain is not always easy. And over the next school year, over this school year period, and over many weeks at different points in this school period, we're going to be invited to climb this mountain, to go on a hike together, to experience what it's like to be on this particular mountain, because this isn't any mountain. This is the mountain to which Jesus has invited those who listen to him to be with, to be on, to enjoy his words, to dwell in his teachings, and to go on the hike to which he is leading. You see, in Matthew chapter 5, picking up at the very beginning of that chapter, Scripture records Jesus saw the crowds. He went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. Now, what we start to understand, at least, is as Jesus is in this ministry, and Matthew records the moment, Jesus has a practicality. He has a logistical reason to get on the side of a mountain. He sees a large crowd of people, and Jesus is compelled to teach them. And so the logistical part of that is Jesus is going to put himself on a higher plane so that he can preach, he can kind of project his teachings to this large crowd. There's a logistical issue, there's a logistical reason here. But this could have very easily been the Sermon on the Beach. Because in the previous verses, Jesus is at the Sea of Galilee and he's calling his first disciples. And he could have preached this sermon at the sea, by the Sea of Galilee, on the beach. But Jesus doesn't do that. As he's gathering and building and starting his earthly ministry, Jesus chooses a mountain. Because I think there's also a couple of other reasons. Matthew wants to make a very theological grounded point. And he does this many times through his gospel story, that Jesus and Moses are connected. That Jesus is the greatest high priest, that he goes above and beyond the great high priest that is Moses. And so much like Moses going on the side of a mountain and meeting God on Mount Sinai and bringing the 10 Commandments, we have this moment where Jesus goes on the side of a mountain. He's going to bring us something new. But there's also, I think, a very deep theological reason why Jesus chooses the side of a mountain. Because mountain climbing isn't always easy. And what Jesus does is he positions himself to invite all those who are listening to go on this hike with him. You're invited on the mountain with Jesus. And on the mount with Jesus, there will be those moments where, man, this thing is easy. I got this mountain thing down. This is so beneficial. I love this. And there will be moments on this mountain that Jesus invites us on that are difficult, that are hard. And what Jesus does is invites us to sit right alongside of him on this mountain. And church, this is what we're going to do. We're going to sit on the side of this mountain and we're going to let Jesus teach us. And we're going to have moments where we say, this is great, this is beneficial, I love this. And there will be moments where we will say, this is hard, this is difficult. And we will have those crying Lucy moments. But here's where I want to begin. I want to begin at the end. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount takes place in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. These three chapters, after those two verses of Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, there are 106 straight verses of red letters. 106 verses of Jesus talking. So Jesus sees the crowd, he gets up on the mountainside because he wants to teach them, and he begins to teach them deeply, thoroughly. He begins to invite this mountain climb for all who will listen over these three chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. And so for many weeks, actually 30 plus weeks over this school year, we will be deeply diving into Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthews 5, 6, and 7. Because Jesus sees you and he sees us. And he sits down on the side of a mountain and he invites us on the mount with him. But I begin at the end this morning because for us to fully realize the depth of this teaching, I believe we can go to the very end, the last 4 verses of the entire sermon. The last 4 verses of this sermon are going to help shape and mold exactly what Jesus has said in the previous verses. And all the verses that come in Matthew 5, verse 3 on, all the way through Matthew 7, verse 27, this ending allows us to frame out exactly what Jesus speaks and teaches on the side of this mountain. So let me pick up in Matthew 7, verse 24. These are the last verses of his 106 verses of his Sermon on the Mount, as we call it. His conclusion, if you will. The words of the Lord. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a mighty crash. Why begin at the end? Why start with Jesus' famous parable that concludes the entire sermon? Here it is. Jesus is serious about what he teaches. Jesus is serious about all the stuff in those 106 verses. Jesus is serious about what he teaches. What is the conclusion of the sermon? It is a practical call to action that those who hear these 106 verses will put into practice. They will build from this teaching. That out of this particular time on the side of the mountain, those who hear these words will build their life on the rock, on the solid rock. Because Jesus was not only acknowledging the wind and the storms and the blowing and all these things that go on in life, he is saying one who hears these words must put them into practice. And what Jesus is serious about is that the things that he is teaching about must be put into practice. Because if they're not put into practice, what does Jesus say? You're the foolish person who builds on sand, and your house will tumble. Your life will be in shambles. And Jesus gives practicality to what exactly he is going to share in these 106 verses. This end provides the importance that we need to read this entire sermon, to experience this time on the side of the mountain. Jesus doesn't give lofty exercises of thought. Jesus is not giving us a practice of encouragement to grand, lofty kingdom ideas. He is practical, he is precise, he is kingdom focused, and he is calling all who hear him on this mountain to live out what he says. And what Jesus is serious about in this teaching is a difficult mountain climb. The things Jesus teaches, these moments in these 106 verses, are difficult. And he isn't serious because Jesus is serious because he wants his people, his children, to build their life on the rock. So Jesus is on a mountain. And mountains are hard. They have crying moments. Getting to the top is a challenge, and his teaching is a challenge. The very first words, Matthew 5, verse 3, are a challenge. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. His teaching is moving us, challenging us, pushing us. It is there to form us into different kinds of people, kingdom-shaped people. And Jesus knows what he teaches in these 106 verses are difficult. And here's what I believe. This difficult climb on this particular mountain, Jesus' teaching is not a question of ability. It is a question of willingness. Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, is not a question of your ability. And I don't care who you are and what your story is and where you've come from, you have the ability to follow the words of Jesus. It is a question of your willingness. Far too often, the Sermon on the Mount has been viewed at or seen as, well, this is lofty grandeur thought Jesus just wants us to think about. He's not real serious when he says, turn the other cheek. He's not real serious when he says, love your enemy. He's not real serious when he says, do not worry about your life and what you'll eat and drink. He's not real serious. How can you be serious about these things? Jesus is serious about this. Jesus is calling us, those who are on the side of this mountain with him, he is calling us to be people who put into practice, like the wise man, building our lives on a solid rock. Jesus' teaching is not a question of our ability. Mountain climb will be so difficult. You know why so many messages are going to be stepping on toes for so many weeks? Because it is a question of willingness. And we don't like to be pushed on our willingness. And yet Jesus saw the crowds, he sees the church, he sees you, and he gets on the side of the mountain and he begins to teach, knowing this will be difficult. Knowing that our willingness is in question. This isn't new in Scripture, by the way. Just in the previous verses of the very same sermon, Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, and Jesus' kind of concluding remarks of the entire sermon, Jesus even said, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. That is not a teaching of ability. It is willingness. Who is willing to put in the work and the effort and the relationship capital with their God to look for the small road, to live on the small road, to find the small gate? It is not a question of ability. You have the ability. And it may be a difficult climb, and you may stumble at times, and you may run out of breath at times, but Jesus is teaching us that there is a willingness that must be to find the small road, the small gate. How about in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 and 25? Later on, Jesus continues teaching in this area. He says, if anyone wants to become my follower, let them deny themselves. That's not ability, that's willingness. We all have the ability. Are we willing to deny ourselves? Take up your cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Or how about the simple illustration that we get at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry as he begins to call his first disciples, Matthew chapter 4, verse 20, when he calls his first disciples off those fishing boats. At once, they left their nets and followed him. It wasn't about ability, it was about willingness. On the side of this mountain, your willingness will be challenged, and it will be challenged by Jesus himself, because what Jesus challenges us and teaches us is all kingdom-oriented perspective. It is about living this life from a kingdom perspective, a kingdom foundation. It is about living as a person who has a willingness to struggle on this mountain from time to time. Are you willing to drop your nets, your entire life behind, everything you've known and done? Are you willing to leave all of that there so that you can follow in his footsteps? That is what this sermon does. So, I ask, will you? I'm not asking you, can you? The question, the invitation this morning that comes out of Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27, Jesus' ending of his Sermon on the Mount, is not a question of can you. It is an invitation that asks, will you? Will you climb this mountain? Will you listen to these words and put them into practice? Will you do the hard work at times of picking yourself up off the ground? Will you go on this expedition? Next slide. In the early 1800s, the explorers Lewis and Clark were commissioned to find a waterway that would connect the mighty Mississippi River all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It was believed that the Mississippi would flow right into the Pacific Ocean. It was this common thought. And so as America went westward, Lewis and Clark were taking their expedition and they were moving westward. And they took their people and their supplies and their canoes with them. And they traveled with their canoes because it was believed that they would get to the Pacific River via a river. So they prepared and they gathered the core of discovery and they went on those canoes, and then what they found was the Rocky Mountains. One of the things I love about the Lewis and Clark expedition, or at least one of the stories, is as the core of discovery gets to the Rocky Mountains, and the river ends, and they take the canoes and they hike up the mountains with them. Because the belief was that if we can get to the peak of these mountains, we can get to the top of these Rocky Mountains, that there will surely be a river that will flow on the other side out west towards the Pacific Ocean. And so the core of discovery, they get to these mountains, or canoes are useless at this point, and so they hike up these mountains with canoes. And when they got to the top, you know what they discovered? Everything they took with them was useless. The canoes were not going to work. And so they had a decision to make. Were they or weren't they? As they ran out a river, and instead of that long anticipated waterway, the Rocky Mountains towered massively in front of them, as far as their eyes could see. All their training, all their tools, everything they knew how to do was now useless at this point. They decided to adapt. They decided to leave their canoes on those mountains and to move forward in a new way, new terrain. They made the choice to move forward. They completed their mission, but only because they had the courage to admit that the world they thought they were in was nothing like the world that they traveled in. The canoes weren't solid enough for their new terrain, and only by adapting could they move forward. And Jesus says, don't build your life on something that shifts. He says, build it on the solid rock. One of our shepherds, Tom Snyder, is going to make himself available in the back. I'll make myself available up front. We're going to sing one more song in this place, and then Tom will dismiss us in our shepherd's prayer this morning. But the invitation is pretty simple. It's there on the screen. Will you? Will you? We are embarking on a mountain climb that will challenge us as individuals, that will challenge us as a church body. And the question that will come up again and again in Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount and these 106 verses is, will you? Perhaps we need to lay our canoes down. Perhaps we need to realize we are in a new territory that will challenge us, that will move us. But the guide, the one who goes on that mountainside in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 and 2 is one who has not only our best interest at heart, but has our souls with him. He cares for this journey. He challenges us on this mountain. So will you? Will you step into the mountain with Jesus? Not to simply hear his words, but to put them into practice. Let's stand together.